Hey, what's up, Applied English? Before we get into today's lesson, one thing I want to point out is that I did add one more day to your African American literature test. One thing I noticed over the weekend as I was checking through gradebooks is I noticed that this wasn't appearing on everyone's calendar at the same time. So just wanted to equalize that for all of my classes. I'm leaving it open for one more day. It is important that I have this as a discussion point on parent-teacher conferences on Tuesday night. So if you have not taken your African American literature test yet, what I would recommend doing instead of doing today's lesson right now is maybe catching up on missing work, prepping yourself, taking the test, and then catching up on this lesson as this week goes on. You could use spring break as a catch-up time for what we cover this week. This test is one of the most important grades that goes in this semester. So if you have not taken it yet, please make sure you are taking the time today to make sure you're ready for it and then taking it so I can use it as a discussion point for parent-teacher conferences tomorrow. That being said, let's take a look at today's lesson. And let's pray before we get into our agenda. Dear Lord Jesus, thank you for this day. Thank you for this opportunity to do something a little bit new with my classes this year. We pray, God, that you are opening up our minds and our hearts to the message that you have for us today. Please help us to sharpen our skills, whether we are in person or whether we're doing this over the computer today. Please also help us to draw closer to you, to enjoy your creation, and to understand just the blessings that you've poured out on us, that you pour out on us in our everyday lives, but also the blessings that you poured out onto us for eternity through your Son, Jesus Christ. We love you, Jesus. We pray this all in your name. Amen. Day 25 lesson agenda. Let's do it. So one objective for this entire week, I want to see your guys' ability to support your ideas with internet research. Just going to cover some research basics this week as we get started, keyword started, with our Black History essay. This is largely what we're going to be working on in the month of March, going into early April as well. Right now, you're watching our Black History essay prompt video, so we'll be walking through that prompt in just a moment. I'll mention here too, this video also covers basics about the research process. So if research is something that's relatively new to you, or if you know that you have kind of some bad habits with internet research, we'll definitely cover that today, and we'll go into some more depth about that in our next lesson later this week. You'll also notice there is a discussion in today's folder. It's a really small one called Choose Your Topic. Gives you a chance to choose what you want to write about in our Black History essay. In our next lesson, we'll just take what we learned today a little bit further, writing our thesis statement. I'll demonstrate that for you. I'll also demonstrate how to find evidence from your research and bring that into an essay, at least an essay outline. So there they are, Black History essay prompt we're looking at right now. Choose your topic we'll look at to finish this video. So you'll notice a PowerPoint right there that's walking us through the research process. We'll look at that in just a moment. I want to look at our essay prompt first. And there it is. So don't freak out about this prompt or about the length of this prompt. It does include our outline, which we won't even touch really until our next lesson. So today we're just getting the basics of it, and we'll talk about research as well. In our last unit, African American Literature, we studied texts that illustrated Black progress and Black excellence in American history. A lot of our texts focused on both of them. However, the articles, speeches, poems, stories that we read are only a few examples of Black progress and Black excellence. What I want you to do in a 2 to 3 page essay, notice that this is a range, not necessarily a word count or a limit like that, looking for a page range here. Identify an influential person in Black history, then explain how he or she has impacted our society today. For the sake of clarity, the person you choose can be recent or from the past, so that this person can be dead, can be still alive, can still be very young. But you will want to choose someone who has a good amount of available internet research. So, for instance, you might be able to get creative and say, well, my mom has had an impact on Black history. And that might be true, but for the sake of this essay, that might be difficult to find some research for. And I do want you to get good practice with research as part of this project to prep you for our final project coming up in May. So choose someone who's going to have a good amount of available research on the internet. Some ideas for topics. Writers, like we've covered already. Maybe find a different Black writer than the ones that we covered in class. Fine artists, scientists, inventors, musicians, actors, athletes, activists, politicians, entrepreneurs, business people, teachers, pastors, mathematicians, all of those are good ideas. These are first come, first served. So I don't want 15 people doing LeBron James as a topic, because that just gets kind of boring for grading on my end. I think we'll go no more than 2 people per class on the same topic. So it is first come, first served. If you do know who you want to research, you'll want to get right to selecting your topic as soon as possible. We'll talk about that in a little bit here. Even though this is an expository essay, even though you're focusing on researching and explaining and arguing, you want to avoid writing in the first and second person, so no I, no you in your essay. Be sure to cite research that supports your thesis. We'll work through the research process, learning how to cite throughout this week. We'll learn a little bit today. Your essay must include our MLA heading and title. We'll review that in class. And once it's time to type after spring break, we'll type it in standard 12-point font, double-spaced. We'll go through formatting again after spring break. Speaking of spring break, a little time frame for us to get a look at here for this project. Notice March 8th through 21st, a nice long range for researching and outlining. That is today, stretching through spring break, just for you to have enough time to collect your research and make sure that you can kind of plan out what you want to write. We'll save the heavier writing for once we're back together after break. The week of March 22nd, we'll focus on finishing our outlines. I think I have it set that maybe the outline is due on the 23rd or 24th. We'll work on drafting the essay online, so actually typing out the essay based on our outlines. Again, the outline is attached to this document. And then that next week, March 29th through April 2nd, we'll revise and edit the final draft. One thing I just realized is that April 2nd is a day off of school. That is Good Friday. So we may add one more week on the tail end of this project if it gives us just more quality time to proofread, edit, and perfect our final drafts. More on that to come. Obviously, we've got some time to work through this project. We'll come back to these questions in just a moment. I do want to show you how I am grading this essay. I do apologize for this formatting. Schoology likes to mess things up from time to time. But notice that this is a large assignment. This is the second biggest one we do all semester. It's an 80-point essay right there. That's the same amount as your acting project and your last test combined. So while we are working on this for an entire month, we do want the hard work that we put in for an entire month to be reflected in the gradebook. Notice that I'm dividing this up by structure. So your introduction is worth 10 points. Your body paragraphs, topic and summary sentences, 10 points. Evidence, 10 points. Commentary, 10 points. Conclusion, 10 points. Grammar I split into 2 sections. Spelling, usage, and agreement is 1 section. Sentence structure and punctuation is another 10 points right there. So notice that grammar gets emphasized a little more heavily this time around, now that we've learned more. And then formatting, like we talked about, another 10 points. Citations is on there, so how you represent your research is there. Again, we'll be talking about that quite a bit this week. And once again, your outline is there. We'll be looking at thesis statements to start our next lesson. I have given you some space here to start thinking through how you want to create your thesis statement. It starts by answering these guiding questions. Who has been influential in Black history? Who is the person that you plan to research and write about? And then how has this person impacted our society? List at least 2 different ideas here. By answering those 2 guiding questions, you'll have what you need to form your thesis. Again, we'll look at that in our next lesson. But we will want to answer question 1 today. Who has been influential in Black history? Who do you want to research and write about over this next month here? Let's talk about that a little bit. Starting with the research process here. So you've got a question to answer. Who has been influential in Black history? Maybe you know the answer to that question. Maybe you need to do some research to figure out that answer. Let me open this up in PowerPoint. We'll talk through how to work through that research. And here we are. I like to call this little mini presentation the research process. We'll be looking at some steps of this in depth in our next lesson as we talk about writing thesis statements and using evidence from our research. For today, I want you to be familiar with how the research process works. It starts with step 1, which has already kind of been done for us. Whenever you want to start researching, the first thing to do is to write research questions. This is something that you would do after you select a general topic for research, although we are using a research question to get started with our research today. One of the first things you'll want to do is write questions that will guide your research further. It's one thing to research trees, for instance. I type in the word trees on Google and get 2 billion results, right? If I can write a research question, I can refine my topic to guide my research. What kind of trees are in Wisconsin? Question mark. It will give me a much more directed search than just typing trees in Google will do. Little pro tip. Strongly worded research questions make for good database searches. Once again, typing in what kind of trees are in Wisconsin, question mark, into Google is going to give me much better results and much clearer results than just typing in trees would do. There are 2 types of research. There's informational research and there's persuasive research. The kind of research we're doing is more on the persuasive side as we try to explain how and why someone has been influential. You would do informational research for other projects as well. We'll actually do some informational research to end this semester. In informational research, you'll need a series of questions to aid in collecting lots and lots of information. In persuasive research, you might only have a couple of research questions, maybe even as few as 1, in order to guide your research. Second step is to find reliable sources, finding answers to your research questions using sources from the internet or print sources like a book, newspaper, or magazine. I do want to teach you guys how to do good internet research this year. And we know that the internet is a wonderful tool for finding answers to our questions. It's full of information. The problem is that it's not regulated very tightly. It's a very free place. What we need to do is learn how to evaluate the credibility of all potential sources. That's the main thing we'll be focusing on in our next lesson. One thing I want to give you today is a website's domain name. That would be like the .whatever at the end of a website's URL. In general, .orgs, .govs, and .edus are the most credible. .org for organization. Any sort of nonprofit usually has a .org. Milwaukee Lutheran, .org. .gov is U.S. government websites. .edu, for the most part, those are colleges, American colleges. .coms, .nets, and .infos need to be carefully examined, mostly because anyone can purchase one of those websites. If I wanted to make MrHandtagRules.com, I absolutely can. I'd probably have to pay a yearly fee to host that site, but once I have that site, I can do whatever I like with it, as long as it's legal, obviously. If your URL ends in any other domain, .io, .tv, .biz, you gotta be extremely careful with it. Those ones are regulated even less than the ones that we've seen already. But wait a second, Mr. Handtag, can't I just use whatever Google tells me? I type in what kind of trees in Wisconsin are on Google, and I get an answer immediately without clicking on a website. The answer there is no, capital N, capital O. What Google has been doing these past couple of years is it pulls up an immediate answer for a lot of research questions. The issue there is that even Google is using information from another source. If you just take that information and then try to cite it as Google, you would be wrong. Google is actually pulling that information from another source that you would need to follow. So follow that information, click on the link that Google gives you to find the true source of that information. Wait a second, Mr. Handtag, can't I just use Wikipedia? Wikipedia is full of good information about my topic. Notice the capital N-O, but then it transitions into not exactly. Wikipedia, as we know, is not credible by itself because authors are never named. Generally, in research, we want to be able to use information that we can take to a source. We want to know who wrote that information. However, there is a trick that I will show you here. Let me go to my topic on Wikipedia. For all of my examples for this project, I'll be using Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass is the first author that we looked at for our African American literature unit. And here I have his Wikipedia article. It's probably huge. Just because he's such a celebrated black writer, there's a lot of information on his life, on his work, on his legacy. Sadly, I can't use any of this inside of my research paper because I don't know who wrote any of this. However, what Wikipedia does for almost every article is I go to the bottom and I notice these references right here. Anything blue in this reference section is clickable. So if I click Biography Early Life, I'll open it in a new tab. And now Wikipedia has led me to a website to frederickdouglassheritage.org. So it looks like there is a nonprofit organization dedicated to the life of Frederick Douglass, and here I can find some information about his early life, his family background, the house he grew up in, how he learned how to read and write, those kinds of things. That's probably going to be helpful for my essay, so I could use this source. Notice that I couldn't use Wikipedia, but I could use the source that Wikipedia used. One thing to note, this one doesn't have an author either, so this probably isn't the greatest source in the world, but it's infinitely better than that Wikipedia source where I cannot point to any author or organization whatsoever. Notice that there's a lot more references and resources that I can look here too. They listed 180 references, as well as further reading. Those would take me to books, maybe not as helpful there. External links right here will take me to other websites. It looks like these ones take me to just collections of his writings anyway, so if I wanted to find anything he specifically wrote, I could use that. Just notice that Wikipedia collected a lot of those references for me, so oftentimes Wikipedia is a good first place to look for research, as long as you're using the references and not the information on the article itself. Little pro tip for you there. So let's say you found some sources that work for answering your research questions. The next step is to pull information from those sources. We want to collect our information. For this paper, as we research, you'll use your outline to keep track of any specific details you want to use as evidence. There are two ways to include research in an essay. One is to direct quote it. If you see something word for word from one of your articles that you want to copy exactly into your essay, you're allowed to do that. It's called a direct quote. You want to place it in quotation marks, so copy exactly what your source says, place it in quotation marks. A direct quote should not be any longer than 4 lines in an essay. If it's any longer than 4 lines, it has to be cut down, or you need to use a different quote entirely that says something even better. Another way to represent that information in an essay is to paraphrase it. To paraphrase means that you state the information given by a source in your own words or phrasing. Since it's in your own words or phrasing, it does not need to be in quotation marks. It does still need to be cited. Still need to give credit to the original author of that information. We have to do that whether we're direct quoting or paraphrasing. We'll cover that in our next slide. I should note right here, as you're researching, I've given you space in your outline to track down any evidence that you'd like to use from your sources. I think I forgot to mention this in the prompt. I do want you to use at least 2 sources for your essay. I'll make sure that that goes back into the prompt and that we can cover that later, but I do want you using at least 2 internet sources to find your information for your essay. The last step in the research process is to cite sources. Once again, you do have to do this whether you choose to direct quote or paraphrase your research. Generally, what we do to cite our source is to use the author's last name to give credit to who wrote that information. If no author is listed, we've got to use the title of the article or website the information is from. I should note, you can cite sources inside of the sentence. So let's say I'm the author of a piece of information. You could write in your sentence, Hantak writes on page 3. Notice your sentence has listed the author's last name and the page number if it has a page number. Then comes your direct quote. Or it can go in parentheses at the end of the evidence. So let's say you've paraphrased something. It comes from page 3 of my article. What you could do after your paraphrase is put in parentheses author's last name and page number. Notice the period goes after the parentheses. That's called a parenthetical citation. There is another way to cite sources called a works cited page as well. I noted here that we'll do this in English 1. I forgot to mention that we'll also do this at the end of this semester too. So by the end of this semester, you'll also learn how to do a works cited page. We'll do that in May. You'll need both of these in English 1. So you may want to use that research process as you choose your topic today. So it says this, just a short little assignment for you today, little 5-pointer. It says, now that you have read through the prompt for our Black History essay, it's time to choose a topic, a person that you'd like to write about. You'll want to make sure you choose a topic that interests you because you'll be working through this for about a month here. Once you've found an influential person for your essay, I just want you to write 1 to 3 complete sentences to identify who this person is. You're claiming your topic. You should also explain why you want to write about him or her. That will help you start to kind of build up your thesis statement for our next lesson here later this week. Once again, in order to make writing interesting for me, I'm setting a limit, no more than 2 students using the same topic in each class. So this is first come, first served. I want you to note that Frederick Douglass, once again, is off limits. Over the course of these next couple weeks, I'll be using him for my examples, so just don't use Frederick Douglass. You can use any other writer we did over this past month here, or anyone else you can think of. Check the prompt for ideas. I will be okaying topics by commenting on your posts here, so be sure to pay close attention to my feedback on your post. Take a look, make sure that I've okayed your topic, and then we can roll with that as we write thesis statements and continue researching later this week. Have fun as you find a topic. Let me know if you have any questions in Microsoft Teams.